Hello, everyone, and welcome to KSO Front Row, the Kamloops Symphony's web series that brings you up and close and gives you an intimate look at what we do here at the Kamloops Symphony, right from your very own home. My name is Daniel Mills, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kamloops Symphony. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm presently speaking from Kamloops to Secwepemc within the unceded traditional lands of the Secwepemc Nation, and I'd also like to acknowledge all of the native lands on which we are gathered across the globe. We are very grateful to be spread out over such a beautiful planet that we can call home. This web series, which we have now rounded KSO Front Row, was created as a way to further engage with all of you, our loyal subscribers and ticket holders, artists, choristers, sponsors, volunteers, while we pivot our programming within our current circumstances. Before I introduce our 3 stars of today's session, I do want to offer a few thank yous. Of course, we want to thank our public funders who have stepped up in a major way to ensure the Kamloops Symphony and arts organizations across the country can continue operating, specifically the BC government through the BC Arts Council and the Government of Canada through the Canada Council for the Arts. As well, thank you to all our sponsors who have continued their support of us during this time, our donors, and of course, all the ticket holders who have chosen to donate your tickets to our canceled performances back to us. We are very, very grateful for you, and all of you are ensuring that we're here for the long term, continuing to deliver the musical experiences you have come to love. So thank you. And speaking of those musical experiences, as some of you may have seen earlier today, we formally announced our first concert experience of the 2021 season. We are thrilled to be working once again with our Kamloops Arts colleagues, Western Canada Theatre, to produce a version of Igor Stravinsky's devilish chamber work, The Soldier's Tale. The project will feature WCT's artistic director, James MacDonald, taking on 3 roles, the narrator, the soldier, and the devil himself, and it will feature emerging dancer Lauren O'Connell, joined by a septet of musicians for the Kamloops Symphony, and of course our own music director, Dina Gilbert. The performance will be online September 26th, and we're also offering select capacity limited screenings at the Paramount Theatre on Sunday, September 27th. So more information can be found on our website at www.kamloopssymphony.com. Other announcements. Also, as many of you know, about a month ago, I made the pledge to run every single street in the city of Kamloops as a fundraiser for the Kamloops Symphony. And I'm proud to say I'm just over 10% of the way there, but our fundraising is going exceptionally well. You might see this map behind me. It's one of the planning tools I have to plan all my routes, but all proceeds of this project will go towards ensuring we can keep our musicians active for you. So again, more information on how you can support me in my running can be found on the Kamloops Symphony website. So about today's session, I'm sure you're aware by now, but does not feature me, but our music director, Dina Gilbert, and 2 of our principal woodwind players from the orchestra. They will open up a bit of dialogue about themselves and their various roles in the orchestra and what it's like to play their respective instruments. Today's session is meant to be interactive, so we welcome you to submit your own questions in the live chat, and we'll try to get them as we go. We also have a dedicated Q&A session at the end to answer all your burning questions. So feel free to write, say hello, do whatever you want in that comment, of course, being respectful, but please do participate. Thanks again to my colleague Ryan, who's behind the scenes editing this on the go. And again, bear with us if any technical difficulties arise, but we hopefully got most of them sorted. So anyway, that is enough for me, so let's get to business. So I'd like to introduce our guests for today. So the first one is no stranger to all of you, and our one and only music director, Dina Gilbert. As many of you know, Dina is not only the music director of the Kamloops Symphony, but also l'Orchestre Symphonique de l'Estuaire in Quebec, and she has toured all around the world with various orchestras. She holds her doctorate in music from the Université de Montréal, and I'd like to welcome my colleague, Dina Gilbert.
Hello.
Hi, Dina. How are you?
I'm super excited because, as you mentioned, we've been announcing a great news today, so I couldn't be more excited to be filled with music today. Yep.
Yes. Yeah, very exciting. So I won't dwell too much on you and get to our 2 other guests. So the next one, this guest has her bachelor's in music and from the University of British Columbia, along with a master's in music and an advanced certificate in arts and entertainment from Capilano University. And she has held the role of principal flute with the Kamloops Symphony since 2014. So I please welcome Heather Beaty to the screen.
Hi.
Hello, Heather. Thanks for joining us today.
It's good to be here.
Thank you so much. And finally, last but not least, our third guest is this afternoon, evening, wherever you might be, and whatever time it is there. She has her undergraduate in music from the University of British Columbia, an artist diploma from the Vancouver Academy of Music, and a Master of Music degree from Boston University. She won the role of principal oboe with the Kamloops Symphony in 2010, and thus is celebrating her 10th year with us. So I would like to welcome Marea Chernoff to the screen.
Yay!
Hello. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good
How
to
are
be
you?
here.
Thank you. Well, that's enough from me. I'm not gonna make small talk because I'll leave it to you three wonderful artists, and I'll skedaddle out of the screen. Enjoy, and I look forward to hearing your conversation as we go.
And we see you at the end, though. So hi, Heather. Hi, Marea. How are you?
Great, thank you. How are you?
I'm good. I mean, as we've been chatting backstage, it feels exciting, but also surprising for us to be doing these things as we are used to be on stage and listening in front of people. But for us, and that new format is something different to discover. So I'm really eager to discover that a little bit more with both of you. As our audience will learn way more information about your background, your instrument, and what it is to be a professional musician. So first question, just to get a little bit more about how you started music. Heather, could you tell us how music came to your life, actually?
Sure. So I actually live in Vancouver, even though I play with the Kamloops Symphony, and I grew up here as well. And so my parents, they were very generous, and they started me off in music education at a young age. In Vancouver, there's this fantastic school called the Vancouver Academy of Music, and they offer really great programming for kids. So it was a natural choice for my parents to put myself and my twin sister into some classes there, including Orff and Kadai, as well as Suzuki flute. So that's kind of how I started. And it took a while to even begin playing the instrument. And it's kind of funny. This is the modern flute and the flute that most adults play. But children, because they're so much smaller, they begin on curved head joints. And that's what, oh, there's a photo of me. So you can see exactly the instrument I'm talking about. It's the same instrument, but it just has a curved head joint. And I learned kind of like the way you learn to speak as a child. So everything was memorized. I learned the Kodai method and Orff, which helped my ear training. And I wasn't learning how to read music notes until I was about 7. So everything in my early years was just by ear. And I think it's really helped me as a professional now pick up music quickly and memorize music as well. So that was my start.
I think it's really good that you've been starting with this method because it looks more intuitive, as you say, and more you're playing music. And sometimes as we grow up, we forget the notion of actually we need to have fun as we are learning the instrument. That said, was it always fun for you to do your daily practice? Or, I mean, I'm speaking for myself, but I remember that as a student, sometimes I had my crisis moment where I didn't want to do my hour daily practice or so. So how was it for you, the young Heather, practicing flute?
When I was a child, it was difficult. I'm not going to lie. I wasn't a perfect student. And just because I'm a professional who loves playing daily, when I was a child, it was difficult because I had other things. But my mom and my teacher, they were very supportive when it came to making music fun and trying to keep the intensity and discipline in a really approachable way for me as a child. So I think games and just like playful songs that were folk songs, it just helped make the whole thing really just like a game fun for me as a child. So that's how I practiced and kept going. And of course, my mom was very supportive in making sure that there was a routine, but it was always like I always wanted to pick up my instrument.
Oh, wow, that's perfect. Okay. And that's a message also for parents, you know, and music teachers that, like, of course, sometimes there might be waves of motivation, but if you find the right points of interest, then it's easier to keep going. And for you, Marea, how was it how did you started playing oboe?
Well, I started, first I'll just say a little bit about how I started music in general. So a little fun fact, I also am from Vancouver, and my first home was actually a boat in Cole Harbour, which is right down by Stanley Park. And back in the day, it was called an old wood boat. Now it would be a classic yacht. There's few left, unfortunately. But when I was 2, my family moved to Kitts Point, right across the street from the Vancouver Academy of Music. And apparently I pointed to the school, hearing all these wonderful sounds of music coming across the park, and said I wanted to go there. So I think when I was probably 3, my parents enrolled me in Orff. Like Heather, I did Orff, I did Kodai. I also studied classical guitar there. That was my first instrument. And I did ballet. And of course, because I was right across the street, I would run across the park, even if it was muddy, and I'd arrive at ballet with mud splashed up the back of my tights. And so, yeah, it was all good. But oboe came when I wanted to play in band when I was going into grade 8. And I actually really wanted to play the flute. And I had a chance to meet with the band teacher before school started and told him that I wanted to play flute. And he said that he could really use an oboe player. And despite all my musical background to date, I actually didn't know what an oboe was, but I agreed. So that was how I came to oboe, not knowing what it was. And that's what I've played ever since.
Super. Okay, again, I was like, okay, where are they now? Looking at the screen. Fabulous. And Heather, so could you tell us, because there's a way of like, yes, you're saying your instrument and such, but there's a déclic you need to have in your skills to actually fully become a professional musician. And for you, what would be those kind of skills that will make it better for a musician to focus on the career, to make it possible?
Sure. So I won't dwell on the obvious points, which are dedication, motivation, perseverance, hard work, commitment. We all know that that's what it takes to become successful in life and any skill that we set ourselves out to do. But I think really what's helped me become focused on my career and really motivated, the skills that I've really needed are personal advocacy. So taking charge of what I want to do for my career. The nature of being a professional musician is that there's so many unknowns. So especially when it comes to being a freelancer. Like I play at the Kamloops Symphony, but I'm also a freelancer because I live in Vancouver and there's a bunch of other things that I do to make a living. And I want to be a musician primarily, so I have to have a lot of personal advocacy and motivation to be innovative and creative with the many different outlets that you can pursue. So that means looking for new opportunities, finding opportunities for yourself and creating them, really discovering what it is you're interested in beyond, like, for example, I'm not in a full season symphony, so I also plan concerts, and I love to plan concerts because it means that there's more going on in my community that I can be involved in, and I love teaching. So I fill in the gaps, and being a professional musician is so rewarding because I have the control.
And actually going to this, Heather, since you mentioned you've been also leading your own project, you're doing different things. So then how does that look a normal day or a normal week for a musician? And obviously I'm not mentioning a pandemic normal week.
Oh gosh.
All our activities are at a different rhythm. And we've had actually to change our skills as well. I'm assuming that both of you've been teaching via Zoom sometimes, or needed to totally like find new ways to connect and still maintain your teaching activities and such. But what would look like a day for you, Heather? Managing different teaching and orchestra gigs and gigs.
You know, the normal routine is not so different than the pandemic, besides the fact that nowadays I am not seeing people in real life, obviously, which is really, it has been difficult. But the normal routine involves a lot of organization. So I have to be really on top of my personal administration, so like responding to emails and booking things. I dedicate a portion of the day to that, and there's so many different, like I was just saying, aspects of my career. So I have to make sure that, like, children, I devote equal amount of time to them and prioritize the needs. So there is a lot of personal admin that goes into my day. But practicing, I have to make sure that I plan my time to do that. It's amazing how quickly the day can go by without that sort of planning ahead. So I make sure that I do that. And then my mornings are usually spent with practicing and personal administration. And then I go on to teach from after school hours, like 4 o'clock till about 8 o'clock. And that would be a typical day. Now, sometimes, of course, I'd go on to a rehearsal in the evening or even in the afternoon for various projects coming up. But that wouldn't be a daily thing. It's something that happen more on the weekends or in the evenings. And then, of course, going to Kamloops, I get to go once a month. And so a big part of my week is devoted to practicing and preparing, and also getting there. So I need to make sure that in concert weeks, I'm really organized, and there's a lot that goes into it behind the scenes, like travel preparation. Who am I going with? Yeah, all that stuff that's kind of boring to talk about, but it means like this is what goes into the career.
Yes, and those special skills about organization and mindset, about all the different things we need to do, are super important. So that got me to think, Marea, I like to think about musicians to be a little bit like athletes, about how much discipline we need to have. So for you, do you have an aim of hours, daily hours of practice or per week that you're doing? And also, do you have some strategies to be at the top of your game whenever you're having a concert or a recital?
It's a good question. For me, my days don't feel always quite so structured, because they can be quite varied, and depending on what I'm doing at what rehearsals I have for chamber concerts, those can take place maybe in the morning when I might have scheduled a student at another time. It's a lot of juggling, actually. So even though we have students that are relatively scheduled at certain times, there has to be a flexibility, and we have to be prepared, I think, as musicians to alter that schedule and still be able to be productive. And so it takes some focus, and sometimes that means, practicing when you really don't feel like it. But what's really interesting about that is once you've got your instrument out and you start playing, you're fine. You go and you're enjoying yourself. And it's amazing how long you can actually go. And then dinner's at 10 o'clock, which is sometimes a normal occurrence for me. But it's just like going to the gym. The hardest part is actually getting there. And then once you've gone, you don't regret it. And it's the same with when you're trying to figure out your schedule to practice. For one of my biggest things, I feel like, is for staying on top of my game. I think with any career, if we ever feel like we've arrived or achieved, then it's time to quit, that we've finished the journey. And I think anything like this has to involve lifelong learning in any career. And that whenever we do achieve something, that we can make it better or on to something else in a similar aspect on the instrument. There's never enough that we can accomplish. For me, the other biggest challenge for staying on top of my game is I play several instruments, which I'll talk more about later. And so this is a relatively recent thing. And so for me, it's really become the challenge of balancing how I can equally give time to each instrument and still achieve. And so again, this is where my weeks look very different, because depending what I'm preparing for, I might be doing a completely different instrument and focus on that instrument for a week, and unfortunately feel a bit neglectful of another one. But then the following week is a whole different thing. So that's added a really unique challenge to my career. And I feel like at this point in my career, it's been an exciting addition, keeping me on my toes and definitely humble, if nothing else. But yeah, that's basically how I'm trying to stay on top of my game and create that balance between the teaching and the practicing.
And do you sometimes get stressed before a concert performance, or you're like always cool and no problem?
Well, no one ever tells me I look stressed. In fact, I've usually heard the opposite, that I look so calm. But I do get stressed, and I find I make stupid mistakes when I get nervous, and that's still something I'm working on. Again, that lifelong learning. But as I've added newer instruments to my career, the stress goes up when you're suddenly on stage performing on an instrument that you haven't had in your hands for decades, that isn't like your best friend, and that has added a new dimension to performances. But it's also exhilarating, and it teaches you, I think, even when you come back to your instrument that you are more familiar with, which, don't get me wrong, it's not that I don't get nervous to play that, but it's how you use the nerves. And I think if we don't have any nerves, then we're going into a concert with a lack of a certain energy that makes the performance special. We just don't want those nerves getting in the way. And so I'd like to say I'm calm before performances, but there's always that little bit of nervous excitement, but you work through it, and then you just enjoy playing.
Yeah, you kind of need that kind of energetic calmness before concert, getting that right excitement, because you're not stressed, you're excited, and then that change everything, and you want to push till the edge to make sure that, like, after the dress rehearsal, no, we could even do that much better there, and I'm gonna listen even more there. So we are like this, are artists, you know. That's why I feel that with athletes and musicians, there's so much in common. Even though you've been doing this kind of excerpt every day, there's a big possibility that you can do a better time. I mean, if you've been in sport, that's not an objective at all in concert to finish a piece faster than anything. But I feel there's always that possibility of going further, and this is super exciting. For me, the biggest stressful events or more exciting events were sometimes also the best accomplishments, or the things I will have in mind, and and I would like to know with both of you which accomplishment you're the most proud. For example, Heather, what would be the accomplishments you're the most proud of?
Well, there's quite a few. I mean, I'm now like almost 10 years into my career, but there are some that stand out more than others. And I mean, a big one for me was winning the job with the Kamloops Symphony. It was a huge milestone, and it's just such an honor to play orchestral music, and it was a dream of mine from an early age. As soon as I started playing the flute, to be a professional orchestral musician. And just, you know, as you go through university and like in music school, that's kind of like they pinhole it a bit, like, oh, this is an orchestral performance degree. And I just remember feeling like, as I was going through my university years, I really would love to win a job, but there was a part of me that was like, I just really want to play the flute as well. Like, I want to be open-minded to my career and challenge myself. But I also kind of knew that I wanted to stay on the West Coast. So I had to have that kind of like realization. So then when I started doing my auditions after university, I didn't really want to come at it with like all or nothing. And I know a lot of musicians have that attitude, and it garners their success. But I wanted to keep my mind open. So when I won the job, I was just so thrilled, and I loved the musicians that were in the orchestra already, because many of them were my colleagues, like you, Marea. So it was just a community that I already had a connection to, and it was feasible in my lifestyle, meaning I could continue to live in Vancouver and commute. So winning the job, it just was like, oh, this is so perfect. I can continue.
So you were already playing with the Kamloops Symphony Orchestra before winning the position then, once in a while?
So I was invited to be an extra musician on occasion. So I had played piccolo and second flute alongside the musicians in the symphony, but also I had played with many of the orchestral musicians in the KSO in Vancouver. So, for example, with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra or the Vancouver Island Symphony Orchestra, where I was already starting to freelance.
Okay, and since it's such a really important process, but our audience might not have a clue about how it is actually to do an audition, could you explain a little bit what it is? Because it's nothing like a regular interview for a job.
In fact, I think the orchestral world has really set a fantastic example for a place free of prejudice, bias, and stigma. Due to the nature of the audition format. So what happens is everybody is asked to prepare a list of excerpts, so short musical solos from very beautiful solos or technical solos from symphony orchestras. And everybody comes in with the same excerpts and then are asked to perform round by round. So the first round will be everybody in the audition. And they might play like 4 excerpts, including perhaps a segment of a solo from a concerto for their instrument. And they do so behind a screen. So there's a panel on the other side that consists of the music director and a selection of other principal players in the symphony. And they're sitting there listening, so that it's also a panel that's unbiased. So they know the music, but they aren't necessarily all flute players or all string players. So they like can have different perspectives. Like a string player might notice a musical element that a flute player might not be focusing on, because the flutist is like, oh, their intonation, or oh, that phrase should be done differently.
That's how I would have done it.
Yeah, it's really fantastic, because it means there's lots of perspectives, and also because it's like round by round, then you get a chance to play again. It's not cutthroat, like, okay, that's it. And everybody has an equal opportunity. So
and
that's what it seems like.
Yeah, sorry, equal opportunity, because we are just mentioning, for example, okay, let's hear number one, and then the person is coming in, we don't even hear like the footstep, where the person cannot say any kind of cannot sneeze even, like, you know, it's like, you know, because this could be interpreted as a code in between the panel and the members. So that's why at first, when they initiated these blind auditions, it was to make sure that the teachers on the panel were not to specifically choose their students, but actually, like Heather mentioned, this process also brought up that even if we are thinking we don't have unconscious bias, we do, because it also helped having way more women as part of orchestras until after, I think, 2 decades, it was almost like a parity between women and men winning audition. And it's always a surprise for us, the panel, when finally we discover who was the person playing beautifully for those 2-3 rounds. And of course, we're always like in awe about the amount of focus it requires for playing at the top of your game for that specific day that has been worked for several weeks.
Yeah, it doesn't, like, even though there's a screen and you're anonymous, it doesn't stop it from being a terrifying experience.
Yeah, for sure. Yes.
Today we don't. Stressful.
Yeah, like today, we don't see the people who are watching, and the same thing as when you're playing in front of a black curtain or something. So it's even more intimidating, I guess, to connect this way.
I think if you were to ask me to give any advice, it would just be practice in that setting as much as possible. To kind of like, because like even performing on stage, right? You're hit with a lot of psychological pressure, just like the act of being in the attention of an audience, which is different than when you practice in your own space at home. So when you're preparing for an audition, I would recommend setting up that just for like a visual thing, so that when you're setting up a black screen or something, so that when you're in the moment, it feels normal.
Yeah, good advice, really good advice. And you, Marea, what was one of your biggest accomplishments you have in mind?
Well, winning the job with the KSO was definitely, for me, also a big accomplishment. And it really added to the freelance career with some stability, which is always something that we look for. And but for me, especially recently, as I mentioned, the playing several instruments. And as Heather mentioned, it's so important as a musician, and particularly a freelancer, that you do have other opportunities, you create opportunities, and that you can be flexible. And so I've always sold reeds to people, because we'll get into reeds a little bit later, and they're hard to come by, good ones. So I've done that and taken various gigs and always teaching. But I guess after about 15 years of a career, orchestral, modern instrument career, the opportunity came for me to pick up historical instruments. So Baroque oboe, and subsequently classical oboe, and recorders, which kind of comes with the oboe because it's what we call a double. And what that means is that quite often in a Baroque oboe part, you'll see a recorder part. And so you don't usually hire a separate recorder player. As an oboist, you learn recorder. And so over the course of the past, I can't believe it's been about 6 years or so, opportunities have just opened themselves up to me. And they've been sometimes a bit frightening, always challenging. And I'm proud that at this point in my career to have had the ability and the drive to take on the challenge, because there's times that those instruments almost went flying out the window. Because it's, especially when you are, and again, I don't want to say I'm fully accomplished on modern oboe, so far from it. But my big joke is that I decided to go to these instruments because, I perfected modern oboe. Anyways, that is so not true, but it's definitely given me this perspective of learning new instruments again. I mean, when I started playing Baroque oboe, I sounded like a beginner, basically. And the frustration there is, what you want to sound like, and it's how do you achieve it? And over time, more and more, it's happened. And so recorder, though, even though I have been doing it for several years, it wasn't until just a couple years ago that, again, an opportunity came up, and I took the instrument more seriously and took it upon myself to really make it an important part of my career. And so that led to me having an idea to actually set up a recorder program in Vancouver, because there was no such thing. There are a bunch of adults who play recorder with few outlets to take even private lessons at the time, and or have ensemble experience unless they set it up themselves or take classes. And I was on faculty at the Vancouver Symphony School of Music with oboe, and I took a proposal to them about starting my recorder program, and they granted me the program. And so to me, that is one of my big accomplishments. And so it's been running for at least a year now, and I have classes and pre-COVID ensembles and private lessons. And what's been amazing is that even though it's not ideal, of course, none of this online stuff is for music, but we have been able to move the classes online, and I've been able to change formats to make, we can't do ensemble online. It just, because of delay and noise cancellation, we can't even really do duets. But I've been able to teach classes and hold Baroque class, sonata classes, and keep it going online, and also keep the recorder community engaged. And it's been really important, and I love working with them all. And
well, thank you for doing that. I mean, it's so exciting that you've been building a class. I'm sure that you must be so proud, both of you, of having your class, your studio, and different students. How many students do you have in recorder then, Marea?
Well, some of my classes have had 8-10 people. The ensembles, I had 2 different ensembles with a total of probably about 15 before COVID. And then a few private students, including a couple kids. And I'm really trying to grow that aspect of the program. That's challenging online. Starting kids on any instrument online presents very different challenges. And especially if in any sort of group class element, one-on-one has its own challenges, but in a group, it's just that much more challenging. So that's sort of the next step, is to try, because the adult program is really going well, but it's getting the kids engaged. And also I think part of it is continuing to sort of get rid of the stigma of recorder just being that instrument that you play a little bit in elementary school and it probably doesn't sound very good and it's really loud and piercing. That it really is an instrument that was extensively written for, including by Bach. And it's I think that's another thing, that one of my goals is to just keep sort of pushing ahead, because in Europe they don't see the recorder quite the way we do in North America. It's always been a very legitimate instrument.
Yeah, and then we've been speaking of instruments, but now let's get to the real part, getting to discover these instruments, see them from close. And actually both of you are playing several instruments, so we are quite lucky. So maybe we'd be just starting with, of course, those are 2 woodwind instruments, even though they are not all made of wood. Heather might be explaining this. So how do we just produce a sound on each of your instruments? Let's start maybe with Heather for the flute.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the flute is part of the woodwind family, but like Dina said, it's not made out of wood anymore. It's made out of silver, and of course, the sound is produced from the head joint and from wind, from our breath. So if you want a crash course on how I make a sound, I usually begin with telling my students to hold up their pointer, put it underneath their bottom lip, and shape their mouth and their embouchure, which is the way our mouth is shaped, into the word two. And then instead of saying the word two, you just kind of blow through as if you were saying it. Two, 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 two. And I know I look ridiculous, but this is what it means to be a musician. You have to be comfortable. And you just kind of keep that finger underneath and blowing across it. So the flute, the sound is produced by air that blows across the tone hole. Oh, let me see if I can do this. And it doesn't, not all of your air will go directly into the tone hole. And so what we do is then place the lip plate underneath our bottom lip, kind of like where the finger was. And then I'm going to say the word two, but through my breath. And keep my position. So you'll notice not much changes. So if I'm going to be playing a low note, the lowest note that I have is a B. It takes kind of a slow air. Still the articulation and airstream of the word two. And then if I'm going to be playing a high note, I won't play for you the highest note I can because that's just mean. But if I'm going to be playing a high note, it will just need faster air. So if we were to think about blowing out birthday candles, and if you had a really big cake, you would need a huge amount of air, but also fast air, right? To kind of make sure that the candle flame was blown out. And you don't puff your cheeks out like I did, but so for the high notes, you need faster air and a smaller embouchure. So tinier too. That's the crash course.
Excellent. Thank you for the crash course, Heather. And then Marea, so how are you going to be making some sound with the oboe?
Yes, well, sounds is a good way to put it to start. So the oboe won't make a sound without the reed. And so the reed is a very important part of it. The oboe is a double reed. And so Dina, I might need you to come back for this one. Double reed, but what I mean by that is, I don't know if you can find the camera here. So you can see that I have two pieces of cane that are tied onto what we call a staple or a tube, which has cork on it. And so my mouthpiece or reed can make a sound on its own. And I spend hours and hours and hours every week making reeds. Now, every oboe I play needs a different reed. So that's just another whole conundrum, or conundrum's the wrong word, whole other aspect of playing the oboe.
And on that, I have to say that I'm quite lucky because clarinetists have single reed and we buy them, we scratch them a bit, but it's nothing like building our own double reed from scratch. So yeah, Marea for the rest of the class.
So as you see, Dina has just the one reed. So without her mouthpiece, she can't make the reed vibrate at all. So that's where we get the double reed. We've got double reeds, and so they vibrate.
And otherwise it would be looking like this on, wow, okay, like this.
Yeah,
and
it's hard to find that camera.
Yeah, exactly. Now that we are split, yeah, exactly. And then this would work. But in your case, so no teeth anywhere because problems could happen.
Yeah. So basically, we've got the reed, and so that's about what we want the reed to sound like. This is called the crow. We're looking for C, and then if we get that, we should easily get a C just from peeping the reed or playing it as we would in the oboe. And so a lot of what Heather said is actually relevant to the oboe as well, as far as sound production. One thing with our embouchure, though, is we definitely do blow into the reed. for us, it's more like an inverted whistle. So we make the whistle shape, our jaws kind of down a little bit and the corners of the mouth come together in that ooh shape. The reason it's inverted is we roll our lips in with the reed. So we're not biting down on the reed. We just want this nice relaxed ooh shape, kind of like a drawstring bag idea with the lips to support the reed. Now, one thing is, as I showed you before, if I can find the camera, the opening of the reed is so tiny. And so this presents an interesting issue for oboe that really no other instrument has. And that is we never use all our air. So what that means is that whenever we finish playing, we have to exhale before we inhale because we still have air left over that's kind of gone bad in our lungs before we can use it. So for us, the trick is actually good air production, but it's more the quality of our air and not the quantity because we can only let go so much at one time. So when you breathe to play the oboe, you don't actually want to take as big a breath. Now, there's no wind instrument where you really want to breathe up here. You always want a nice low breath. But for oboe, you just don't want it to keep going. We really just want a slow breath, low breath, a low breath, and only filling so far. And then very similar to the flute, depending what register we're playing in, our air goes slower or faster to help with that. Because my reed's a bit dry. Now, the lowest note is B flat. And oboe can go quite high, nowhere near as high as the flute. One of the higher notes that we tend to have as our most written in range is sort of more between a D and a D, 2 octaves worth. It's kind of where the oboe sounds the best and is the most comfortable to play. Not that we don't see lower or higher notes, but that's our general range and how we get our sound.
Excellent. And now that we've been discovering how we produce sound with those 2 instruments, we're going to jump in with Heather's new lesson, as we'll be discovering more than just the flute. And also, we'll be also able to listen to some professional experts. Of course, if you are able to recognize them, please write them in the chat. So, Heather, this is your lesson.
Great. So, I am very excited to give a demonstration for you on the 3 instruments that I love in the flute family. So I have for you the modern flute, which I play in the Kamloops Symphony. Then its little sister, the piccolo. And then I have for you the Baroque flute. So I'm going to be kind of giving you a crash course again on the history of these instruments and how they're used in the symphony. So let's begin with the modern flute. Now, the modern flute was the first rendition of a flute with keys. And it was designed by a flute maker named Theobald Boehm, who was a German flute maker. And he started doing major innovations to the flute, which is kind of interesting. You can see here, this is the older version, of course. This is the Baroque. I'm working backwards though. So this is what it was. And then now, obviously, we see that the instrument has keys. And Theobald Boehm decided to add keys to help with things like intonation, technical proficiency. So you can move your fingers a lot more ergonomically with the keys because some of them cover more than one hole when you move them. And it just meant that there was more you could do. So composers liked the instrument in this fashion as well, because they could write more challenging music. And wow, as soon as the Boehm flute was popularized, it just spread like wildfire all over Europe and beyond. And the amateurs started picking up the instrument. And of course, more works were written for the flute. And it was just more prioritized in the symphony orchestra. So I'm going to play for you a little solo from a piece that we actually played in the Kamloops Symphony this past season. It's Entr'acte from Carmen, and it's written by, maybe I'll leave that as a secret. You can guess. In the comments, I was told you're supposed to guess, so. that's On Track to Carmen, and it's by the composer Bizet. So if you got that right, bravo. And I chose that just because it's a very melodic, beautiful example of what the flute can do. I played it a little under tempo. In the symphony, it probably would be played a little bit faster. And it's just, yeah, it's an opening setting from the Carmen opera where it's just kind of exemplifying the scene in Spain. And it's all about nature and beauty and love. So that's why it's so fun to be a flutist. We get to do a lot of the main love themes. And yeah, so that's the modern flute. And moving on to the next little sister, this is the piccolo. And Bohm was actually an innovator in the design of the modern piccolo. Like I was mentioning with the modern flute, he also made major changes to the keys and the design of what we see today. But as you can see, the piccolo that I have is still made out of wood. Mine is grenadilla wood with metal keys. And the wood kind of gives it a warmer sound. Personally, I prefer the wood for orchestral playing. I know that you might think of the piccolo and its popularity in marching bands. And for that scenario, I would say a metal instrument probably is a little bit more suitable, given the fact that piccolos and marching bands are outdoor instruments. And so they also need to pierce through more of like a brass ensemble. So that's where you'd see the metal or the silver piccolo. Now mine is made out of grenadilla wood, and it's just a really, yeah, like I said, warm, beautiful sound. The piccolo, actually though, just to say a little bit of a historical comment, was first used by the composer Jean-Philippe Rameau in French opera of the Baroque period. So I actually got to play it 2 summers ago with a Baroque ensemble, and it was really fun. It was super challenging though, without the keys and the mechanism that we have today. So this is an excerpt from a Italian opera, and it's an overture to an Italian opera, and maybe you can guess what it is. That's Overture to Semiramis. I've always butchered that name, but it's an opera that Rossini wrote. And it's really fun. It's also very common on orchestral auditions if you're doing a piccolo audition. Moving on to the next instrument that I promised, this is the Baroque flute, otherwise known as the traverso. Traverso because flutes were actually the recorder was commonly referred to as the flute, and that is the one that Marea was describing that was common in the Baroque period. And then this is the transverse flute, the traverso, and it's the grandfather to what we have today. Now, this flute is made out of grenadilla wood as well, and it's called a Palanca model, which is a German model, and I bought it myself 2 years ago, and it's just been such a joy to discover. The Baroque flute, and Marea will also talk about this in her little lesson, but it is tuned lower than the modern flute, which is tuned to A440. The Baroque flute is tuned to A415, and that's based on the note A and the frequency that it has. So everything is lower, and a big reason why Baroque music didn't tune things higher like we have today is just they used gut strings in a lot of the string instruments, and they can't be tensioned to the same same tension that we have with our steel strings of today. So gut strings, because they would just snap, and yeah, it was just the common popular pitch of the day. So with the Baroque flute, I decided to pick a solo for you from a really beautiful piece of music by Johann Sebastian Bach. Now, he was, as you know, like a prolific composer in the Baroque period, which spanned from 1600 to 1700. So, sorry, 1750. And Bach wrote so much music in his time that we are so lucky to have today. And he especially loved the flute. And this would have been a similar instrument that he was writing for. You can see there's one key, and that key is for my pinky finger. I'll move that a little bit, but everything else I just cover with my fingers and their holes. Now I have to do such different fingerings for this instrument. It might look the same to you, but it is totally different. I started playing it about 4 years ago and really taking it seriously as well. And it's just been, like Marea said, I'll echo some of the comments she's mentioned. It's just been such a joy to discover a new instrument in the family of instruments that I already play. And also just get to know the Baroque era a little better. So this is from St. Matthew's Passion by Johann Sebastian Bach. And it's a solo called Aus der Liebe. That's just the opening section of Aus Liebe, and the flute is underlying a beautiful oboe da caccio ostinato, as well as a soprano, and it's just a very tender moment in the Bach St. Matthew Passion. So those are the 3 instruments that I wanted to demonstrate for you today. Please, if you have any questions about what I've said or done, pose them in the chat, and our host will present this later on, and I'd like to pass it on now to Marea.
Yeah, thank you, Heather. And it's so wonderful that both of you are also playing Baroque instruments. I mean, it might look like common thing because both of you are, but actually not at all. That's really, really rare that, like, I was impressed knowing both of you, knowing that, like, you were also specialized in such a difficult instrument, as you mentioned. And I like the way of, like, yeah, you're relearning something from scratch, and oh my God, you're terrible at first. And yeah, so thank you. And it's wonderful to be hearing those different sounds. And actually, it would be super fun at one point to be doing such repertoire. But then it's the pitch question that makes it a little bit tricky for the rest of the orchestra, obviously, and everything. So then let's get to Marea, as we'll be starting historically and getting then to the more common instrument we find in a symphony orchestra today. So without further ado, Marea's listen.
All right. So as Dina said, going backwards. So we're going to start with the historical. So the Baroque oboe. And as you can see, it looks quite different. Only 2 keys. Still has the double reed. And instead of cork on the bottom, it's thread wrapped. And there was a lot of thread wrapping in the Baroque. The joints of the instruments are thread wrapped instead of cork. So that was what was used. You can see also an interesting thing, the size difference between the Baroque and the modern reed, where the instruments aren't necessarily that much different in size, at least not length, but there are definitely differences in lengths of tone holes and other things that made the shape of the board, that made it need a bigger reed to vibrate the instrument. So the Baroque oboe, again, as I said, different reeds for every instrument. It has a really lovely mellow sound. And unlike the recorder or the modern oboe even, not calling the recorder modern, I'll get into that in a sec, there is no octave key or hole that helps us get up the octave. So playing the same note higher, it's all air pressure. We don't have anything to help us. On the modern oboe, we've got a key that we can push or press, and that gives us that. So just to give a fun little demonstration as to how music was written for the instruments at the time. If I was to play this oboe and play Tchaikovsky the way I might play it on my modern oboe, it actually sounds absurd. So. Also some wrong notes there. Sorry about that. Swan Lake Tchaikovsky, but it isn't meant to be played the same way that modern instruments are. But as I said, the music was written for that. So if you hear it on the modern oboe, assuming that we get this right this time. And so it's a very weird double to do modern to Baroque because the playing is so different. So the air has to be much more gentle on the Baroque oboe. And I just want to play you a couple short excerpts of French Baroque, Lalande. And French Baroque is one of my favorites. It's growing on me more and more. It's got this sense of stateliness and precision, but has to sound basically carefree in a way. You'll just hear the sound of the Baroque and how this music really was written for it. So you can hear that it's just got such a different sound. And now when I do have to play Baroque music on modern oboe, I really try and bring that same quality of that more relaxed feeling to it. Anyways, it's been great. So the next was classical oboe, and Ryan has a picture of that. Now, funny enough, it's my oboe that he has a picture of, but my friend, colleague, borrowed it a while ago, and he's in the US, and so we still need to figure out how to get it back. Anyways, so again, in music, there was no such thing as a definite start or end date as to when an instrument would suddenly morph into another instrument. You would have different changes. So the first classical oboes still had only 2 keys, and you started seeing shape difference in the bore of the instrument, started getting a little narrower. And so my classical oboe, I have an 8-keyed classical oboe. And so it actually has an octave key on it. I wish I could demonstrate it for you, but as I said, I don't have it at the moment. Now, again, to give you an idea of the reeds, the evolution, we have the Baroque over here, the classical, which is getting smaller, but still bigger than the modern reed. So we have this, again, this progression of as the changes took place in the shape of the bore, also did the reeds. Now, I do not have a romantic oboe, but I do have a picture, again, Ryan. And so as you can see, there's even more keys. The shape still looks relatively similar to a classical. And again, we're not talking about freezing anything in time, but music started being written for the instruments that were being evolved. So as Heather said, the more keys there were that could open and close with other fingers to create more notes, then we'd have more flexibility in the music to get more technical, and the music got more demanding. We could do more, not to say that there's not demanding Baroque music and classical music. So that's sort of the evolution. And then we get to the modern oboe with all of its keys to date. Before I get into the modern oboe, I just want to go back to the other instrument that has become such a big part of my life, and that is the recorder. This is an alto recorder, and it was really commonly written for in the Baroque, sonatas, concertos, suites. And so I just want to play a little bit of Bach, just so you can hear the beauty of the recorder. Now, the interesting thing with the recorder is, while all the winds have over the years developed keys and changed. The recorder has remained basically unchanged. There are some companies playing around with it and adding keys and that, but in general, the recorder is still the recorder that it was in the day. And it sounds very much like the human voice, and has prevailed since the Renaissance times, and it almost became non-existent in the classical period. Music just quit being written for it. And so we're lucky that we still have a bunch of repertoire, and people are writing for it more and more. So that's exciting. So it's a little bit of Bach. And so that's the recorder as it was when Bach wrote this. Now, finally, the oboe, modern oboe. So you will hear oboe in the orchestra playing gets a lot of solos and a lot of long lyrical solos, partly I think because of the breathing issue as well, that we can actually play long phrases before we have to breathe. So I just want to play you one of my favorites, and I got to play it actually in Kamloops several years ago. I will tell you who it's by. It's Rimsky-Korsakov, and if you want to try and guess at what it is. And because I know we're running short on time, I will unfortunately leave it there. One more instrument. Now, there are so many oboes throughout the years, different sizes that would be played. And again, we don't have time to go through all of them, but one really important instrument is the English horn. You would be familiar with it, even if you're not familiar with it. And it is in the key of F. It is lower than the oboe, has a more mellow sound. And even if you don't think you know what an English horn sounds like, you will have heard it for sure. And this is a very common double for an oboe player in an orchestra. And I'm sure you all recognize that as Dvorak's New World Symphony. So that is a very small snippet into the history and evolution of oboe.
Wow, thank you both of you for your lessons. It's been super exciting to listen to all these fabulous excerpts. I was listening, actually I could hear the whole orchestra behind. I'm looking forward to this. As we are almost closing our KSO front row, we receive a question that both of you can answer from Anne-Marie Légaré. She's asking, do you have a favorite warm-up routine? So let's say you're commuting, getting to finally to Kamloops before rehearsal. What do you do to get warmed up?
Well, should I answer first? Okay.
Go for it.
I think the number one warm-up routine is getting there early. I have to get there early or else I feel stressed, and especially in a city like Kamloops that has a lot of like inclement weather and snow. So getting to the concert hall early means that I can not only warm up myself but my instrument, and just kind of like have time to get into concert dress and maybe make myself a mug of tea and then go somewhere and do long tones. That's it.
So just long tones, like keeping the longest possible on different notes?
No, so it's actually a Marcel Moïse exercise that is popularized throughout many flute schools. And it's a half note followed by a whole note in a chromatic descent. And then you take like a nice big breath, and then you repeat the last note you played. So it's just a very like, it's a very easy exercise to do no matter wherever you are. And it helps calm myself, warm up my instrument, because it's just lots of slow notes. And I can focus on my tone, which is like the best thing to think about for a stressful situation, because just making a nice warm tone and getting the metal warm itself. That's my warm up.
Excellent. And you, Marea?
Well, I'll answer less specific to concert, in case the question also was just about a daily warm-up, because sometimes that's also, so for me, again, long tones are always super important. There was someone that once said that long tones are milk for oboists. So, helps those bones grow. So definitely long tones. And I have several different long tone exercises I've picked up over the years or created that gives me a little variety. And then scales. So first of all, the warm up of the long tones, and then getting the fingers moving. And I really like the pattern of doing the first 5 notes of every scale a couple times, and then doing the scale in full after that. So it's a little bit of a sort of grounding in the scale and then doing the scale. So that would be sort of my go-to warm up.
Okay, excellent. I find it really personal when we have, those kind of few things when we are testing a reed, testing an instrument that we do automatically, that sometimes actually I can know without being on stage who's sitting in a chair, because, okay, I recognize that warm up there. I recognize from an orchestra to another one. I always find that it's kind of the signature warm up from every person, and probably just it's sinking as we are students, I guess, and also with the teachers we've been to. I don't know, but I always found it was something special, I guess, for the warm up of every musician. As we're almost reaching the end, I wanted to chat a little bit about the other interests you have. And each time I'm discovering the hobbies and passion of different musicians I'm working with, I find myself really boring, because I'm like, wow, do I have the time to do this and that? How come, So actually, yeah. So actually, I know that both of you are having your specialty in something. And Marea, what is your hobby, and could also become your profession, or actually?
Yeah, well, maybe side profession, side business, which I did have about 11 years ago. And that's actually jewelry silversmithing. And I started it as a hobby through the Vancouver School Board, and I just kept taking classes and accumulated my studio. Then I won the job in Kamloops, and being away so much, it just ended up getting pushed to the side, and my studio in my parents' basement kind of got pushed to the side. And anyways, I just kept meaning to get back to it, but then the whole historical instrument thing came up. So it's been a long journey back. But COVID gave me some spare time, actually, to set my studio up again. And so this was my first completed post-COVID project. So my first real project in 10 years from start to finish. And of course, any of you who know my second oboe player, Loris Davis, she's already bought those because she buys a lot of my stuff. And this was my second project that I completed since COVID. And so it's a ring with a blue tourmaline, which tourmalines are definitely among the top of my favorite stones. So I'm really thrilled to be back at it. And now that I'm set up again, I can make it part of my life. Again, I can do it in bits and not have to dedicate a huge chunk of time. So I'm really excited about that.
So you're like making reeds, and then, okay, I'm bored a bit doing jewelry. Okay, reeds again. So
well, as one of you said, there are not enough hours in the day. There really aren't. So, some days I get to it, some days I don't. Some days I spend most of the day making reeds. Other days, I'll just sort of touch them up and finish them. So it's again, finding that balance and trying to get a bit of everything in every day. But of course, that's impossible. So just accepting when I can get to it and enjoying it, and then of course, music always comes first. So that's why it got put on the shelf for a bit. And but as I said, hopefully now that I'm set up again, because that's the biggest hurdle, was if your studio's in disarray, you can't really work. But now that that's all set up and back, I have a much better chance at keeping it in my life now, even if I'm really busy musically. So
Okay.
I'm really happy about that.
And do you take order? I'm asking, because
I do. I'm trying to set my website up and that. So yeah, keep you posted on that.
so stay tuned. Okay, excellent. And Heather, also you have like incredible skills. Maybe you'll be part of the next, I don't know, cooking show or bakery show. Because what is actually your other business that you're owning?
Well, I have always loved cooking and baking, even as a child. And I think it was around 2013, I decided to make a baking blog just to kind of document some of the things I was making and share them with my family and friends, just as a hobby. And then in recent weeks and months, and 6 months now, I guess, with the pandemic, I started to do a lot of cake orders. Just ordering, because the cake is here now in the on the screen. So I started to do a quarantine cake business where I was baking cakes for people in the Vancouver community, friends and family members who might be celebrating birthdays or engagements or anything really, and they wanted a cake, but they couldn't maybe get one from a bakery. So I was doing door deliveries, like leaving them at a safe distance, and making custom cakes for my friends. And it was super popular, and I made so many cakes, and it was just a lot of fun to like be creative and make things for people that I knew in a difficult time. So it was just nice to be creative with that outlet, and especially when my music had kind of started to dwindle as the time has been difficult for lots of us, performance-wise.
So officially, Heather, I'm ordering a cake for the next time you're back in town, and it will be the KSO cake that everybody will be eating at the break or after or whatever. But that needs to happen, because each time I'm looking at your Facebook pictures on this, I'm like, oh my God.
I think it's so funny doing this interview, because I've learned that, Marea, you and I have a lot in common. And I think like creative individuals, we like to stay busy. And what I love about baking, and maybe you with jewelry making, is like, even though I still am loving to play my flute these days, it's nice to also like stay creative in a different way and be busy with our fingers, which are used to like playing instruments, and create something beautiful and put it out into the world. So that's kind of why I've been really active with it.
And also seeing a result really concrete more quickly, maybe, than the process of rehearsing and then finally getting to the concert. On my part, I have to say that I've never practiced as much piano in clarinet than with the quarantine, because I was just, okay, I need to do something. So that was for me, it was a different way of exploring the new time I had there. Anyways, we're getting almost at the end. So Marea, Heather, thank you so much for your generosity. It's been so incredible getting to know even more things about your profession, of course, about your different instruments that I knew, but then I've been finally being able to hear both of you on these instruments. I hope our audience got the chance to discover way more, and that they will be looking forward to actually see you on stage now that they really personally know you. And without further ado, I will ask Danielle to join us back, as we are going to be finishing this KSO front row.
Hello, thanks so much. Dina did steal a bit of my thunder, but I did want to give a bunch of thank yous to close this out. So again, thank you to all of our funders, all our sponsors, donors, for your continued support. We are so thrilled to be keeping going right now and in these new conditions, but we're definitely here and producing things. I want to thank, of course, Dina for moderating today's conversation and all your insight, and of course our two special guests, Heather and Marea, for, as Dina said, providing so many insights into your instruments and bringing your multiple instruments along with you and playing examples for us. Thank you also to Ryan and behind the scene, my colleague who's been editing us in and out as we go. So thank you again, and finally to everyone who is watching and for taking the time to tune in today and engaging with us in this new way. We will be back again with another event on next week on Thursday, September 10th at 5 p.m. So be sure to sign in then. And until then, stay safe and healthy, and we look forward to connecting again with you very soon. Thank you again.